In April 2025, the IMF's managing director made a prediction: artificial intelligence would widen the global wealth gap faster than any technology in history. But here's the twist: it won't happen the way you'd expect. I'm David, and this is the story of how that warning set off a race against time that nations can actually still win. In April 2025, Kristalina Georgieva, the IMF's managing director, made a prediction that rippled quietly through policy circles. Artificial intelligence would widen the global wealth gap more severely than any previous technology wave. The weight of this statement came from who said it: the institution charged with global financial stability, not a think tank with an agenda. What the IMF had uncovered in its analysis was a paradox. Previous automation waves had made society unequal. Some workers displaced, others elevated. AI was different. High-income jobs would shrink first as robots took over the cognitive work that commanded the highest pay. That meant wage inequality could actually compress. Workers at the top would earn less. But wealth inequality would accelerate in the opposite direction. Why? Because the money flowing from AI, the returns on compute, on data, on models, went almost entirely to capital owners, not workers. And those returns were accelerating faster than any historical pattern had shown. The question became urgent: what would democracies do about it? Watch the two lines diverge. Wage inequality dips as high-income jobs shrink, but wealth inequality spikes. Capital returns concentrate at software speed. This is the IMF's central finding. The same AI that compresses wages explodes wealth gaps. For ordinary people, it means a narrower paycheck at the top, and wealth concentration accelerating faster than any regulation can chase. The clock was ticking on whether governments could move fast enough to stop it. While the IMF issued its warning, one government moved with unusual speed. In May 2026, barely a year later, Kim Yong-beom, South Korea's presidential chief of staff for policy, proposed something radical: a national citizen dividend, funded not by new taxes, but by redirecting existing tax revenues from AI semiconductor profits, specifically Samsung and SK Hynix. Those two companies projected AI-driven profits could exceed 100 trillion won annually, roughly 75 billion. Kim's idea: take that windfall and send it directly to citizens. The model was transparent. Alaska's permanent fund had done this with oil wealth, converting a natural resource into recurring citizen payments. Kim was proposing the same logic: treat AI as shared public wealth, not private accumulation. The market reacted sharply. Samsung fell to 28%. SK Hynix dropped to 29%. In seconds, investors priced in the shift. What made this proposal credible wasn't the idealism, it was the mechanism. Korea wasn't inventing a new tax. It was saying, the money these companies will generate from AI is already being taxed. We're just rerouting that existing revenue to dividends instead of letting it sit in corporate coffers. But South Korea wasn't alone. Across the Atlantic, a different playbook was unfolding. While Korea focused on direct cash, Europe had built something different: a structured transition. The EU's Just Transition mechanism, established before AI was even a mainstream conversation, had already committed 55 billion through 2027 to help workers and regions adapt to economic shocks. Retraining, social protection, regional development in areas hit hardest by job loss. By September 2025, as AI's labor displacement became unavoidable, the European Parliament called for the mechanism to expand beyond 2027. They wanted new economic zones in AI-affected regions. They wanted training scaled to continuous displacement, not one-time programs. They wanted the framework to outlast the current political cycle. The German Institute for Employment Research had the numbers. Within 15 years, AI would reshape or eliminate 1.6 million jobs in Germany alone. That wasn't a future scenario. That was the baseline projection. So Europe's response wasn't theoretical. It was, we know the scale of this, and we're building infrastructure to move people through it. But Germany and the EU weren't the only major economies waking up. In the United States, the conversation was also shifting, in multiple directions at once. By 2026, the simultaneity was impossible to ignore. Between 2025 and 2026, major democracies across 3 continents advanced structurally similar proposals, as if they'd all read the same IMF briefing. In the US, the Guaranteed Income Pilot Program Act allocated $495 million over 5 years for federal cash transfer experiments. Bernie Sanders proposed an AI sovereign wealth fund, treating AI productivity as a shared public asset. The UK launched a $500 million sovereign AI fund in April 2026, with proposals to direct dividends to displaced workers. The pattern across all 3 was clear: recognition that AI wealth concentration required redistribution, agreement on the toolkit, capital taxation, sovereign funds, worker payments, but disagreement on the specific mechanism. Some favored direct dividends, others wanted retraining infrastructure, still others proposed expanded unemployment insurance. But underneath was consensus: do nothing, and wealth concentration spirals into structural instability. Move now, and you have a window to shape the outcome. That window, though, had limits. And one structural danger that none of the proposals had fully addressed was about to become critical. All these proposals shared one structural vulnerability. The IMF had issued a warning that went largely unnoticed. AI's wealth concentration followed the playbook of Standard Oil, a company that reached near total dominance over an entire sector before regulators could move. But AI was moving at software speed. In the Standard Oil era, it took years for competitors to lose ground, for regulations to even be drafted. By the time the Sherman Antitrust Act arrived, the monopoly was embedded. AI was different. The first player to own the largest compute infrastructure and the most valuable data got a self-reinforcing advantage that looked unbreakable within just 2 to 3 years. Each new capability attracted more investment, which funded more compute, which generated more capability. A feedback loop almost impossible to interrupt once started. And that's where the trap closed. The gap between how fast AI was consolidating and how fast policy could move was no longer a lag. It was structural. Governments could propose solutions, but if first-mover advantage had already crystallized into market structure, regulation might arrive too late, which raised the urgent question: how much time was actually left? Policymakers across the IMF, the US, Europe, and Asia converged on a single timeline: 18 to 24 months. That window would crystallize the foundational ownership architecture of AI. Who controlled compute? Who captured the rents? Who owned the data? Once embedded in corporate structure and international standards, reversing it would be nearly impossible. Look at the internet. The first decade determined which companies would become the choke points. AWS, Google Cloud, Azure secured their positions. By the time regulators noticed, no new competitor could build comparable infrastructure fast enough. The market had crystallized. AI was accelerating toward the same consolidation, but at software speed. Governments had a narrow window to shape that architecture from the start, to embed redistribution mechanisms into how AI wealth flowed, before the choke points locked in permanently. After that window closed, reversing wealth concentration would mean unraveling trillions in market value. Possible, but exponentially harder. Which raised one critical question: what tools did governments actually have, and could they move fast enough to use them? The toolkit was already on the table. You could structure it different ways. Capital taxes on AI returns, sovereign wealth funds capturing windfalls, retraining and wage insurance, direct cash transfers. Every tool had been modeled and tested. The debate wasn't whether they could work. It was whether democracies could coordinate on them before the window closed. The through line here is stark. Georgieva warned that AI would concentrate wealth at unprecedented speed. South Korea, Europe, and America all read the warning the same way. They understood the structure of the problem and the toolkit to solve it. But understanding and moving are different. Every month that passed without synchronized implementation was a month. The architecture crystallized around the first movers. The verdict the evidence points to: governments had the analysis, the tools, and the shared recognition that the next 18 months would determine the ownership structure of AI for decades. Whether they could coordinate fast enough to use those tools before consolidation made them obsolete was an entirely separate question. This is the choice that's crystallizing right now, and governments are running out of runway. If you're following how this plays out, follow for the next updates. I'm David. See you next time.